Hi, you are watching Vantage Point, and today we are recording from the Perdana CEO Forum 2013. The topic on Malaysia's growth has been prominently discussed today, and some of the areas that we've talked about are areas such as the strength, the challenges, the opportunities of Malaysia in our bid to move towards a high-income nation, and taking into account as well of the emerging markets surrounding us in this region. And to talk more about this and how Malaysia could leverage upon its strength at the moment and to expedite our transition towards becoming a knowledge-based society. Joining me today are two experts. Firstly, on my right is Mr. Zahidi Alias, who is the Chief Economist for MARC. And next to him, we have Datuk Abdul Rauf Rashid, who is the Managing Partner for Ernst and Young Malaysia. Thank you so much for coming on the show. If I may just begin with Zahidi, how is Malaysia doing right now comparatively with other economies in this region?
Okay, if you look at the whole situation, we look at the growth versus inflation. We look at, for instance, the budget situation, the budget position, the federal government budget position, versus something we call the current account position for Malaysian economy. Overall, if you look at the quadrants where Malaysia is, it's not too bad. In terms of growth versus inflation, for instance, Malaysia has relatively high growth when compared to the level of inflation. For instance, in other countries, they have good growth, but they also have high inflation. For instance, like Indonesia, you're talking about growth 6%, inflation about another 5-6%. You know, that's Indonesia. Whereas Malaysia, well, we are growing at about 5 to 6%. Our inflation is running at about 2 to 3%. So that's good. That's the good part. And if you look at some other components, for instance, in terms of the revenue as a percentage of GDP, Malaysia is taking at about 20% of the revenue as a ratio of GDP, which is not really bad compared to other countries. In terms of current account of the balance of payments as a percentage of GDP, Malaysia is relatively high compared to other countries. But of course, if you look at some of the other components, for instance, in terms of federal government budget, okay, now that one is something which is it shows that Malaysia is slightly behind other countries because of our budget deficit, which we have actually experienced since 1998. Now, if you look at that quadrant, then we are a little bit behind compared to other countries, because other countries are not experiencing a budget deficit. Now, of course, in terms of other economies in the region, Indonesia, Singapore, Thailand, and so forth, going forward, I think we can still maintain that sort of growth trajectory, which is actually between 5 to 6%, if the current momentum in investment can be kept. You know, and that's the reason why.
We look at global demands, the global economy. It's slowly picking up, but it's still relatively weak. And I'd like to go to Datuk Rauf, because earlier in your presentation you were talking about the competition for FDI is getting fierce, and especially in this region. We look at you mentioned Myanmar, whereby ENY has just moved in. So maybe you could talk about comparing that component of competition, because Malaysia, we have been riding on our success in the manufacturing sector in the 1980s up to now. But moving forward, how are we going to remain competitive? Because firstly, cost-wise, we are not as competitive as other countries at the moment. So where do you think we should move forward from there?
So perhaps, if I may, I just bring you back to the World Economic Forum report on competitiveness. I agree, you're saying that we're not as competitive anymore. We're not as competitive anymore in perhaps the labour market. We are no longer a low-cost country as what we used to be, 10, 20 years ago. We are now moving towards a service-based economy. In terms of competitiveness, economic competitiveness, we are the highest rank in ASEAN, other than Singapore, obviously. Indonesia and Vietnam is way behind us, and so is Thailand. So in some ways we are ahead in many things. But going forward, I think like what you said, in competition for FDIs, yes, there is really more competition now for FDIs. Things are not just moving into Asia, it is also moving into Latin America and also Africa is something that we cannot just ignore. There are also emerging markets or emerging economies within Latin America and Africa. And so because of that, we've got to prepare ourselves to do better in certain things. And I think having the ETP or the ATP, the NKEAs within NTP, having the government transformation program should set the scene for us to move in tandem as a country, private and public sector, moving together towards what we're trying to achieve in 2020.
If you take a look at domestic consumption-wise, look at the scalability of our economy, look at Indonesia, 250 million population, Thailand, about 70 million. Yes, we are ahead in terms of perhaps our human capital, knowledge, ICT, but these are really big emerging economies that are coming up.
Yes, we do have that limitation in terms of size of the economy. And I think that's the reason why, even though people talk about consumption in Malaysia, very, very good numbers for consumption, very high personal consumption, growth and so forth, 6-7% per annum, which is actually supporting the economy. It helps. But that one comes also as a result of good external sector. So you have this domestic and external sector actually working hand in hand to ensure that the economy is getting to that 5-6% growth. So in that sense, I would say yes, domestic economy counts, is very important, but at the same time, it's also being influenced by what is happening out there in the external economy.
I'll have to go for a first commercial break, but when we come back, maybe I could continue on your point about external economy. We look at China, growth is slowing down, but do you see that as an opportunity in terms of positioning, or do you see that as a challenge because China is one of the largest
trading partners.
So we'll get to that question after the break. Stay with us. Hi, still on Vantage Point, and joining me today is Zahidi and Datuk Rauf to talk about the growth of Malaysia's economy. And earlier, we were talking about external forces, and definitely China is one of the fastest growing nation, but slowing down slightly lately. Do you see that as an opportunity in terms of positioning, or do you see that as a challenge for us?
There's no question that the effect of China slowing down will have an impact in any economy around the world because of the size of the China's economy. They are probably, people call them the manufacturers of the world. So slowing down of China economy can mean many things. It can also mean that the slowdown in consumption in various parts of the world have actually affected the Chinese economy. That's also another angle to look at it. China being a country with the largest population, also is a big market for consumption. So a slowdown in the economy of China means that perhaps a slowdown in consumption as well in China. That will have an impact in a manufacturer or manufacturing economy like Malaysia. But it also provides opportunity for us to position ourselves better, perhaps to take stock of where we can compete better within the Asia-Pacific region and position ourselves to compete better within the region with the China slowing down. I think that's so. It's a bit of.
If you look at some of the positive plus points of Malaysia at the moment, we are somewhat perceived as a quite strong regional base for multinationals and for service providers, and also we have the infrastructure in place. But perhaps more than that, what do you think it's needed to really push Malaysia forward?
I think the critical thing is actually the human resource, actually the skilled workers. I think we're still debating that on how we're going to solve this human resource problem. For instance, like the what do you call the foreign workers. Okay, that's one issue which we're trying to tackle. Minimum wage, for instance, these are the issues that the government is trying to tackle as well. And I think this one will go by stages as well, And these are the little things that can actually ensure that there is an increase in competitiveness in the future. You know?
I think talent is one, in my presentation earlier, I think I've identified talent as one of the 6 key factors, perhaps to take Malaysia forward. Because if we are trying to move into the knowledge economy, like you mentioned, I think we can no longer compete effectively within the low-cost labour market or low-cost labour industries. So we've got to move up into a service industry, and we're doing that very well. And we've got all the right NKEAs that have been identified to look at that. Financial services, one of them. Invest KL is one of them. So all these things are there. Now the question is, how do we close the gap in terms of shortage of talent? And together with it is actually the issue of wage, the issue of wage level. The problem that we have, unfortunately, is we're very close to Singapore. And Singapore being, if you like, a developed economy compared to, much more developed economy compared to Malaysia, they attract perhaps better talents because of the wage level that they have there. Ernst & Young is no stranger in this field because we are a professional services organisation. We employ about 2,300 professionals in Malaysia, and our main competition for the best talents in Malaysia is actually from the neighbouring countries like Singapore. But having focused policies around attracting and developing talent, policies like having talent corps in place, that should help us. But it will not take, it will not an overnight thing. It's a journey, and everybody has got to go together with that journey and put our effort and focus into it, and hopefully we will get there.
Heard a lot of companies voicing this concern is that the education system, education sector do not prepare our skill force for the skills that is needed to compete in the future market. Yeah,
that's one big issue actually. If you, this is from my experience, okay? If you go to universities, for instance, there is clearly a gap between the graduates that they produce and what the industry wants. And I think now the government is looking at it and try to ask, how do we close this gap? And there are a lot of efforts done by the government, for instance, like Bank Negara is stepping in, for instance, with programs like STEP, for instance. They're trying to get this, the graduates to experience the real life, working experience. And these are little things that they're doing. But I think overall, there should be more effort in trying to make the graduates more marketable, in the sense that they should be learning a little bit more about the industry which they plan to go. For instance, like financial market, they wish to go. Okay, let's do it. Let's bring them to the real world and let them see what the real world is all about. I guess one of the things that can be done, for instance, is actually to have the industry people to come more often to universities and get the graduates to really learn about what is it that they need to be successful in the real industry when they go out, actually. Yeah.
For Ian, why do you face similar problems?
Oh, yeah, I think this education or the issue of talent is a long-term thing. And then education, I think as a country, we've got to probably take a long, hard look at where we've gone wrong and learn from lessons of the past and move forward more decisively. And I think it needs probably a two-pronged approach, like what Zahidi said. One is around education policy, which would only have its effect over the longer term. But in the shorter term, the initiatives like FSTEP and various others that we have, and perhaps a lot more initiatives from the private sector would actually help. Some of the issues that we face in the job market is ability for graduates to communicate. And that's a key part of a professional, especially in a business like ours. So how do we close the gap between graduates that come out from universities, whether here or anywhere around the world, in terms of the gap in communication? And I think that is where the private sector probably has to do a bit of investment. Unfortunately, like it or not, we have to do that until the education policy, which would work over the longer or medium to longer term, would actually help close the gap over time. But we cannot just sit around and wait for the education policy to do that. I think we each of us have got to take our own initiatives to close that gap ourselves now. Otherwise, we'll probably be out of business.
I have a suggestion there. Just one point, just want to take his point. We're always talking about students coming into the industry, but I would also suggest that the academicians also should be given this opportunity to come into the industry. Then only they can relate that to the students, actually. That will be a lot better, actually.
Okay. All right. I have to go for the last commercial break, but when we come back, I would like to talk about more towards investing in knowledge capital, like human resources. Talent is one of them, but what about R&D innovation? Because to move towards knowledge-based economy, it's just not enough for us to rely on manufacturing, rely on cost, labor competitiveness and things like that, but more importantly is how can we invest in the fundamentals, the things that could really drive the country forward in terms of moving up the value chain. We'll get to that after the break. Stay with us. Hi, you're still on Vantage Point, and we're talking about the trends, challenges and opportunities in Malaysia, and earlier talking about human capital. Another important component for us to move towards a knowledge-based economy is investment in knowledge capital, such as R&D, innovation. How well do you think we have factored in that component into our transformation programs?
Okay, when we talk about R&D, we always have people throwing in all these numbers. And I think the last number that I saw was actually only about 0.6% of GDP, the numbers allocation for R&D, which is very small compared to, well, not very small, relatively small compared to Singapore and other countries, Korea and so forth. But I think when we talk, one point I want to take when we talk about this R&D thing is that when people talk about R&D in Malaysia, this is what I realized. People talk about research and development in hard science, something which people usually talk about is what are the new products that we are going to come up with and so forth. The other aspect of R&D which I think I wish to see, at least in Malaysia, is actually research and development in non-science, which is actually in social science, for instance, like allocation for research for Malaysian economy, for institutions like ISIS, for institutions like Malaysian Institute of Economic Research. I think social science research is also critical in the sense that they actually give a broad picture of where the country should be going or the country should be focusing. I mean, this is not hard science, but it is very, very critical for these institutions and some other institutions like this to have allocation by the government. Not just the hard science, but also the social science research, which is critical for the development of human resources in Malaysia. Yeah. Okay, Dr. Rauf?
Yeah, I think this is also one of the things that I mentioned in my earlier presentation, innovation. But I think I also mentioned about entrepreneurship. I think the one bit about innovation that is always understated is the importance of entrepreneurship in promoting innovation. Our economy, in a sense, has been largely driven by large GLCs and also large private sectors. Perhaps the focus going forward is also to encourage smaller businesses with ideas and innovations. And I'm sure the government is fully aware of that because we do have agencies like Agency Inovasi Malaysia, which helps to look at various innovations and putting it into a commercial practice actually. And so these are probably perhaps things that need to be re-emphasized going forward. So I think all in all, be it innovation, be it other things, I think that all the various puzzles or various pieces of the puzzles are there. It's just putting it together and driving it perhaps stronger for the last 7 years before we reach 2020 to make sure that everything goes in tandem and hopefully we'll achieve what we wanted to achieve, a high-income nation status.
We have a huge number of SMEs in Malaysia. In fact, probably 90% of our economy is backed by small, medium enterprises. And SMEs are still facing problems to move up the value chain. They're still somewhat stuck in traditional way of doing businesses, to adapt to ICT and also to scale their products, their services. In regards to that, how do you think we can improve in that component of that important component of the Malaysian economy?
Yeah, I know a substantial portion of them have struggled with that, but I also know many of them have actually moved up value chain and have gone out to the world. I've had the opportunity to meet a number of them because we run this Entrepreneur of the Year event every year for Malaysia. And
what sets them apart? What do they have?
What do they have that perhaps others don't have? One is probably vision and hunger to achieve more than just the local market. You know, people talk about being jago kampung and all this. And I think these organizations, led by these entrepreneurs, have got a much wider vision about taking the business further than just in the Malaysian market. Malaysian market is very limited, like you said. Many of them, you know, I know one oil and gas company who is exporting to over 40 countries around the world. Started off maybe about 15 years ago and grew the business as such. And we also have some of the entrepreneurs doing big mega projects outside the country, fabricated steels, for example. So there are success stories. They're probably not as well publicized as we should. Perhaps the publicity would create a bit more inspiration to the other SMEs.
So you would say that entrepreneurship would be one of the key drivers for us to move up the value chain?
Definitely.
Okay, from Zahidi, comparatively, we look at Malaysian entrepreneurs, and yes, we have the vision, we have the ideas. We're still lacking in areas like, for example, funding, ecosystem. If you take a look at Singapore, they have substantial number of policies, tax incentives, and basically an environment for that ecosystem, entrepreneurship ecosystem to thrive. Perhaps do you see that Malaysia is undertaking that, looking at that area seriously, effectively enough?
Okay. I think when it comes to businesses, whether it's foreign businesses or local businesses, we have all this, what do you call, processes that they have to go, okay? And I think the Malaysian government, for instance, has come up with Pemandu, for instance. Pemuda, and not Pemandu. Before Pemandu was Pemuda. This is an entity or what do you call, a body, which is supposed to actually make things easy for businessmen, for local businessmen and also for foreigners. I mean, the government has been doing all this, except the fact that maybe they should be more aggressive in trying to make sure that businesses, business owners, especially small business owners, can actually get access to funding, can get access to licensing and so forth. You know, this is the thing that which I think the government is continuing doing this.
I think we are actually doing it. We have the policies in place, just that the execution, we need to just expedite it a little.
Yeah, more aggressively.
More aggressively. Yeah. Okay. My last question would be, what are some of the areas do you think we should be focused on? Yes, we have the NKEAs. We have selected some of the industries that we should look into, but moving ahead, 5 years down the road, which are the areas do you think would be a key driver to move Malaysia up the value chain?
Well, if I were to be coming from a financial market, I would say that Islamic finance is definitely something which we have the advantage now, and we should keep that advantage because other countries actually try to compete with us. And I think that one can thrive in the next few years if we keep on having this sort of good regulatory framework, and we keep on putting more efforts in this. It's one area which I would like to see, keep on thriving in the next few years. Yeah.
Okay, yourself, Datuk Rauf?
Well, I think, maybe I repeat for the 6 factors that I mentioned earlier. I think innovation, technology, 2 of them, talent, capital markets, and the 2 others that I can't recall now offhand. But if I can, I would like to focus perhaps on talent, because in all the 6 parts that we're talking about, talent remains the key part that is missing if we were to move up the value chain from a low-cost country into a knowledge-based economy. If we can fix that, and the way we're doing now, we'll probably be able to fix that quickly enough, I think the rest of the thing will fall into place. The other bit, I think, if I may, is the role of the government in facilitating this progress towards high income nation 2020. I think we started very well. It's only good now that if we relook at how Pemandu has done, or what Pemandu has achieved in terms of driving that from the private sector and from the government sector, to create, to relook and re-emphasize and do better in what we've been trying to do. Create a facilitative government machinery, encourage private sector to go into the 12 NKEAs, which the government has identified through proper, detailed, in-depth process. And these are the industries where we should focus on to try and achieve the high income nation status. So if you go along that way, I think we have a good chance to actually get there.
Okay. Thank you very much, Zahidi and Datuk Rauf, for your insights. And thank you for watching Vantage Point. If you have any questions, you can drop us a line on Twitter, Facebook, or you can email me at Cynthia_ng@astro.com.my. That's all for this episode of Vantage Point. Till I see you again. Goodbye.